Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd kindly be taking your seats. Please, councillors, members. Right, good evening on this lovely spring-like day. Members will be delighted to know, given the inclement weather, that there isn't a fire drill pencilled in for this evening. If the alarm does go off, we assume it's a genuine emergency. Democratic Services officers will find a way out and hopefully return and tell us what it is. Bless you. We don't have a live webcast facility this evening, but we are still recording the sound anyway. So no, thank you very much. For posterity. But I will ask if anyone else other than Councillor Cox, who's nobly volunteered, is intending to record this meeting this evening. That's not to stop anyone doing it, but just to make sure that everyone's aware. No, it would appear not. Right, we'll move on with the agenda for this evening. First of all, apologies for absence. I've one from Councillor Clark. Anyone else? Item 2, notification of substitute members. Councillor Hastie for?
Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much. Item 3, notification of visiting members. I see Councillor Mrs Gooch. What item are you here for, please?
Good evening, members. I'm here, Councillor Gooch, to speak on item 16, Court Lodge Farm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other visiting members, so I assume there aren't any. Item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. I'm not aware of any. There are none. Item 5, date of adjourned meeting. Well, if we have one of those, we really are doing badly, but if we do, it's on St David's Day. Item 6, any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at this meeting. Is it agreed, members, that we take that report? Thank you very much. Item 7, disclosures by members and officers. I believe that Councillor Spooner has one. So I start.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It concerns item number 14. I've taken legal advice on this and been told that I should leave the council chamber while it's being discussed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I need to declare that in relation to application 15, 1 Yew Tree Close, Lordswood, that I am a member of Boxley Parish Council, but I've taken no part in any discussion around this application and therefore intend to speak and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Duly noted. Any other declarations? Okay, that's a no then. Item 8, disclosures of lobbying we will take with the particular applications when we reach them. Item 9, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any, members, so I propose to take the entire agenda, such as it is, in public. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Item 10, pages 1 to 12, minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February 2018, adjourned to the 8th of February. One moment. Is it on the accuracy, Councillor Prendergast? Okay, we'll take your point now, then.
Chairman, just regarding paragraph 384, which is the Springfield development, I do think the minutes should note that the motion put forward by Councillor Mortimer and seconded by myself was based on the RAG room, or certainly on investigating that the listed building should be a community facility, and there is no mention of that in the minutes.
I think it's covered in the heads of terms of the section 106, but I'll just check with the relevant officer, Mr. Timms.
Yeah, it's covered by the deletion of heads of terms number 11, which basically allowed for the scenario. So that's what it means in effect.
Okay, is that clear? Thank you very much. Right, members, are there any other corrections to the accuracy of those minutes? In that case, can we approve those as a true and accurate record of both sets of meetings? Thank you. Item 11, presentation of petitions, if any. There are no petitions this evening. Item 12, pages 13 to 14, which relates to the reference made to Strategic Planning Committee in relation to unmet demand for affordable gypsy and traveller sites in the borough. The Strategic Planning Committee essentially decided that as it was a housing issue, in their view, that they would essentially effectively refer the matter to Communities, Housing and the Environment. So, sorry? Yes, we didn't actually ask them to do that, but it was already understood that the general issue of I can't really put this politely, but I think that the Strategic Planning Committee completely misunderstood what we were talking about, and deliberately or otherwise, and certainly the chairman did, and he insisted on treating this as a reference about gypsy site numbers, hence the reference to the review, instead of a discussion about affordable gypsy provision, which is an entirely different matter. Anyway, I will now yield the floor to Councillor Round, who was fractionally before Councillor Prendergast.
So, thank you very much, Chair. I'm sure Councillor Prendergast probably wants to say much the same as me, so I'll keep some of my things to a complete minimum, because I think one thing that Councillor Prendergast does offer, and indeed yourself and indeed Councillor Cox, is perhaps a greater review of actually what happened at SPST. But as you know, I raised the issue because there is an absolute need to look at the whole issue on the basis that my ward is particularly affected by it. And for those that don't know, the last few weeks have revealed that there's an even greater problem than we ever anticipated there being, in that there has been a gypsy count that's carried out, and that gypsy count in itself has raised even more enforcement requirements. The enforcement team are now having to deal with, I understand, something in the region of 30 to maybe even 50 enforcement actions, many of which on every single road of my ward. Now, it's really serious. I'd hate to see the problems that we've got in Headcorn reflected in other wards. That is why I believe that we really need to see and have a proper overview of the needs and supply that are actually required. And at the end of the day, there's a community need. There is a social need, as well as a housing need that goes with it. We want plots, we want places for them. Otherwise, these people are just going to fill in fields and take the place over. Now, that's no disrespect to them, because they need somewhere to live themselves, and they're entitled to find somewhere. So I think we really do need to address this, and we need to keep this at the top of the council agenda, whatever council committee decides. I suppose if it goes to community housing and environment, at least we're going to look at community needs. But I would have thought we would have had a bigger and better debate in the circumstances, but perhaps other members can advise me better.
Councillor Prendergast and then Councillor Howes.
Thank you, Chairman. As a member of strategic planning, and I'm only raising this because we've been asked to note the contents of the draft minutes, but I do believe that they are incorrect as well, and I will raise this with the chairman of SPST, because the European directive that I referred to is not a recent one, and it's not about spreading them, the spreading of traveller sites across the borough. It quite specifically says that as a local planning authority, we must be careful not to place travellers or members of the travelling community in segregated or isolated locations, which some would say that our local plan does. So I will raise that with the chairman of SPSD, but I do think we should note that as well.
And the point is well made. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, like you, I'm a little bit incredulous at where we are on this, and I think we're at the stage of almost having to take our own counsel to the Ombudsman. I genuinely do. If you go and look at certainly the sites, the Maidstone sites, if you go to Water Lane, if you go to Stylebridge, particularly Water Lane, and look at the condition of the site, and look at the overcrowding on the site, and then if you look at the health issues there are within the Gypsy and Traveller population, the life expectancy, the child mortality rates, there is clearly a problem, particularly with senior citizens within that community and with others who have less money, where there is a real issue. And a lot of those are actually, if you like, in the indigenous Gypsy and Traveller population of the families who have been here for a very long time, who are getting squeezed out of a lot of the sites by essentially incomers from elsewhere. And I find it unbelievable that a portion of our community, a large section of our community for historic and agricultural reasons, are not being provided with any social housing, essentially, under the approach that we're taking. And this is clearly to do with the local plan policy. And I think there are faults throughout the council here, because I get from planning policy officers, oh, we were told there wasn't an issue by housing. Well, of course there's an issue. Go to Water Lane, go to Headcorn, go to the sites, and you'll see what the issue is. And we, as a planning committee, are dealing with the fallout from this unacceptable situation week in, week out. I wonder whether we need to address this in a different way, and whether we should in fact put it on the agenda for the forthcoming spokespersons meeting, and perhaps then we can get some of the key players together from John Littlemore's section as well as planning policy, and then actually get a process in place where we can actually get some movement here, because it's quite an unacceptable situation as it currently is. I mean, it's probably worth saying as a postscript that if you go to Gravesend, if you go to Dartford, and you look at their new sites they've brought on stream, the new Ash Green site and the new site near Southfleet, Northfleet in Gravesham, they've got their superb public sites. And then you go to Maidstone's public sites, and they're absolutely chalk and cheese, and it's us, our responsibility as members, to sort this out.
I don't disagree. I'm not going to take much more debate, but Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When this was discussed at the Chairman's briefing for SPST, I think what we were trying to get from pointing this to Chi as well is possibly once they've given it some thought, I think there will be mileage in the three committees coming together, because I think we've got a bit of this is happening because different departments within the borough seem to be saying, well, we were told, when they're pointing the other direction and saying, well, they told us this. And I think it's almost at the stage that we need to get a firm grip on this. I agree very much with what Councillor Harwood has said about Stylebridge, and I think that is so up in the air that I don't really know if anybody knows who actually owns it or who's running it, or there's too much pointing. And I think we need to get to the base of this, and we need to look at it possibly three-way on three different committees, because it's the responsibility, seemingly, of three different committees.
Okay, Councillor Powell, you get the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just taking on board all the comments that have been made by Councillor Prendergast Round and Councillor Harwood as well. There is a major problem. I think we were talking about the Water Lane site, which was is probably walking distance from where I live, and obviously there has been one or two issues from that particular site. And I'm not talking about the indigenous kind of community that we have within Maidstone, but it's the newcomers. But it was very interesting to hear the report of the 30 to 50 enforcement cases that were going on. Because an issue that we have, as a committee, as a planning committee, we give planning permission to people for ex-mobile homes, ex-caravans, etc., ask them to do certain things. I'm generalising here because there are specifics where there's some absolutely excellent. I mean, if I look at a couple of the sites out of Kingswood, I haven't got an issue there at all. Those places are absolutely amazing the way they keep them. But we've got a problem with some of the landowners in those particular areas taking on more and more families and actually charging kind of rent to those people, which is meaning that some of those sites are being treated as a business. They're overcrowded, and wherever you get overcrowding, you get problems. You not just antisocial problems, but you might get littering problems or various things. I mean, Chegworth Road and surrounding roads has sometimes been a victim of that, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's been, those local families. But there is a major issue, and I think until we can actually solve this major issue through this council, and I think we also ought to get a report back from enforcement they're the people that are visiting the sites and understand the problems, to let us know what their suggestions are as to what should be done. But it's a major problem. But additionally, I don't know whether this is right or wrong, but if we're having more sites being brought before this committee, is that helping the situation? I don't know, but maybe that should go on to an agenda as well. But basically, the likes of Headcorn, Lenham Road it's very, very wrong. I mean, I'm sure that no kind of local policies would allow for any of that at all, and I'm sure all the members around this table would agree. And as Councillor Harwood said, it's people that are suffering in the process.
To take the issues in reverse order, in terms of enforcement generally, the Vice Chairman and Group Spokesman will have noted that I have asked for the report on the updatement of the enforcement notice to be discussed on Monday, because following the request from members of this committee to look at enforcement, was felt that the best way forward was to revise that. So I've asked for an update on that discussion. Following that, we can get down into the details of particular enforcement issues. But I'd like to take that separately, because the fundamental drive of this report was about policy and operational issues relating to that. So, with your permission, instead of noting a report, which I think is entirely too passive, and this council does far too much noting of reports, I would suggest that we ask the Chairman, the Vice Chairman, the Group Spokespersons to consider how we move forward on the particular issues that this committee has raised in terms of the social housing need of the Gypsy and Traveller community, liaise with the relevant officers, and to report back on progress to this committee at the earliest opportunity, and then we'll take it from there. That was what I don't want to do is to think that group spokespersons are heading off and doing it by ourselves, but we need to have some sort of discussion and then report back, because doing it in open session here this evening is just totally impossible. Councillor Prendergast.
Just very quickly, I believe the reason that it went to SPST in the first place was so we as a planning authority could do the planning rather than just constantly reacting to retrospective applications. So I think that was the thrust of what we were trying to do.
I think there are two thrusts. I don't disagree with what you're saying there, and I'm sorry if I underplayed that part of the thrust. You are quite right. But I was simply referring to the fact that the initial drive which Councillor Harwood raised was on the communities and housing needs side. But clearly, you are right. We mustn't forget the other strand of that too. And with your permission, I'll incorporate that into what I was saying. And we will take both points forward, liaise with the relevant officers, try and come up with some sort of plan and report back to this committee at the earliest opportunity. Is that reasonable? Thank you, members. And, right, moving on. Deferred items, page 15 and 16. Are there any updates on the deferred items?
No updates at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a very short report, which is always nice. So we move on to the actual planning applications for this evening, which start with the with item 14 on page 17. I will start with the officer introducing the report.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for outline planning permission for the demolition of the existing stable buildings and associated structures and the construction of 3 detached bungalows. Landscape is a reserved matter. The site is covered by policy DM5 of the local plan, and the site is considered acceptable in terms of the new houses with the easy access to the Rural Service Centre of Sutton Valence. In terms of the aerial photograph, the site is visible just about in the middle of the image. You have an L-shaped building at the top of the site with enclosed buildings at the bottom of the site. You can just about see the existing stable, the sort of house associated with the existing stables that is set to be retained, and the existing access onto South Lane. In terms of the site location plan, again, I think much clearer here. The enclosed buildings at the bottom of the site, the L-shaped building, and the existing dwelling associated with the current stables. Access onto South Lane. See the start of houses in the harbour at the bottom of the image there as well. In terms of the site layout, yes, three detached bungalows, 2 in around about the middle of the site, with a 3rd at the southern end. The northern part of the site is to be left open with a new garden, and the use of the existing access onto South Lane. That access will also serve the existing property, which is adjacent but outside the application site. This image shows the proposed dwelling footprints overlaid onto the existing site. You can just about see the existing L-shaped building. Note that the 2 dwellings are being brought down to the southern part of the site, so you'll be losing the stable building and buildings more closely related to each other, with the 3rd bungalow at the southern part of the site over the existing enclosed building. In terms of the elevations, they are detached bungalows. In terms of materials, black weatherboarding is proposed with red clay roof tiles and white UPVC windows. In terms of the layout of the units, there's a garage to the side, and you can see the sort of bedrooms and living areas. In terms of the site context, shows the view looking north. You've got the existing Southwood Stables building on the left-hand side, and the new development at South Bellingham in the middle of the picture. This is the image of the site access, showing the sight lines onto South Lane. This is the existing access to the stable building. In terms of traffic movements, it's likely to be less, the movements linked to the dwellings is likely to be less than that associated with the existing stable buildings. In the photographs, this is just an example of the structures on the site at present. The existing residential property is located to the rear of this structure. This image is looking south, the existing dwelling on the right-hand side, with the stable buildings to be removed in the centre of this image. This is looking south from the access road, with the dwellings in South Bellingham visible in the background. This is looking in the opposite direction, north towards the harbour. In terms of the site access, this is the looking south, looking north along South Lane from the site access. And just some more images of the existing buildings on the site associated with the stables. The current application is considered to overcome the previous grounds for refusal, which relate to a proposal for 5 detached dwellings. Whilst in the countryside, the site is recognised as being brownfield land, with the proximity to the Rural Service Centre of Sutton Valence. The principle of new homes is supported by policy DM5. The current application is an outline form with landscaping a reserved matter. The officer recommendation is to approve planning permission subject to planning conditions. These conditions include the one that covers the management of the new open space at the northern end of the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask the legal officer to just explain how the public speaking will work this evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the chairman and then the planning officer introduces the item. The chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you there and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button on the microphone. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak and you'll see your time counting down on the screen behind me. At the end of the 3 minutes, the chairman will tell you when your time is up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again. It will turn white and then return to your seat. You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the council, but they don't sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on any of the applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker this evening is Councillor Mrs Porter, Sutton Valence Parish Council.
The Parish Council wish to object to the planning application for the following reasons. Development on this site for housing will erode the openness of the areas currently separating the village centre to the north and the harbour to the south, leading to increased coalescence. This will result in significant harm to the character of countryside, landscape quality of the Greensand Ridge Special Landscape Area and the setting of our conservation area. Our further objections are based on the policies set out in Maidstone's adopted local plan and the MPPF. The application is contrary to DM11. Development on this site will cause significant harm to the character and appearance of the area, thus adding to the erosion of our countryside in our parish. This application is contrary to DM32 paragraph 8. The volume of the development will be more critical than its footprint. Paragraph 11.11 states that DM32 will safeguard against inappropriate and excessive extensions to domestic gardens. The application is contrary to Policy SP15 paragraph 2 and contrary to the NPPF paragraph 159. The loss of green spaces will be resisted. Furthermore, as Sutton Valence is a larger village, it can accommodate limited growth. Since 2011, housing in our parish has increased from 598 to nearly 700 homes, a growth of 17% in 6 years. If this growth trend continues, within 20 years, the number of houses in Sutton Valence will have doubled, and Maidstone has its land housing supply. The application is contrary to policy DM33, change of use to agricultural land to domestic land. The parish council is very disappointed that a second plot of land used for horses and stablings is being considered for residential use. This plot of land was originally an apple and chestnut orchard. There are specific heritage provisions in paragraph 134 of the NPPF. This application, set within the rural landscape, will affect the ability to appreciate the historic settlement in the conservation area. The Parish Council is also concerned about the planning application 062284. The decision to approve was made based on the needs of an equestrian enterprise. Now that the business is finished, does this mean another house by default? If this application is approved, we have a play area that backs onto the land, which is one of the worst in the borough. A contribution towards its improvement will be appreciated. The Parish Council seeks assurances that the land designated as communal gardens will be kept in perpetuity as gardens and not put forward for further development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Norton for the applicants, please.
Mr. Chairman, members, the Planning Officer has prepared a thorough and detailed report for you to consider. The facts as set out clearly establish a recommendation to approve the scheme of 3 bungalows inclusive of a large landscape communal garden that enhances the area considerably. The application is policy compliant with the new local plan. The objections from the Parish Council on the basis of coalescence is unfounded in policy terms, as no such policy exists. This bungalow solution is a house type you rarely see promoted by developers, despite the ever-increasing needs of an ageing population, who view a modern bungalow as a perfect housing solution in old age. Interestingly, Age UK state the number of over 60s is predicted to double to 19 million by 2050. Given the above, it is anticipated that local people will want to downsize their homes to purchase a modern bungalow, especially as they are well located for the bus service, surgery and the facilities in the village centre. This modest scheme is on brownfield land, and its redevelopment is of a kind which is fully supported in the new local plan, which went through an exhaustive public examination to confirm a new policy base. The site is on the Council's new brownfield land register of December 2017, Site 116. One important issue not highlighted in the report relates to traffic. Mostly locals complain that development will increase traffic. However, in this particular instance, the traffic generated from redevelopment will be considerably less. To conclude, in technical and planning policy terms, based on the new local plan and the NPPF, there is no ingredient of harm to promote the refusal of this application. The application addresses all the issues raised at the previous dismissed appeal, and the design guidance raised by officers at the pre-application stage. We have done everything the officers have requested. There is no more we can do. Consequently, I ask that you accept the clear recommendation to grant approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Right, Councillor Stockwell, I believe this is your ward. You haven't indicated, but I assume you'd like to.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, well, we've had this 3 times, I think, for 4 houses, 12 houses. We're now down to 3 detached houses. Each one comes up with a recommendation for refusal, and rightly so. This is quite divorced from the centre of the village. It's not in a sustainable location. They have to cross a very dangerous main road, the A274, to get to the nearest bus stop. So it's not in a good place. You've also put in the things that it was designated as a rural service centre in the local plan, which it isn't. It's a larger village designation, so that's entirely wrong. And I think to consolidate more housing down at the bottom of South Lane is just creating problems for the future. We should be restricted there to no further development. This is the thin end of the wedge for me. It opens the door to further developments, fill in all the other bits, and on the other side of the road. The roads are very narrow through Sutton Valence Village, if anybody's been there, down South Lane, very narrow. It won't take extra traffic. And as I say, to get to any bus stop, the nearest one is at the bottom of the hill, and children have been killed crossing that road. So I would not support this at all, and I would propose that we refuse it.
I'll come back to you for grounds. The one thing I am struggling with is the extra traffic, because I think it's quite arguable that it would actually be less. I think we would be struggling with that one. But I would draw members' attention to the fact there is a lengthy urgent update on the papers, if you haven't seen it. And yes, I have seen you, Councillor Mumford, but I'm just trying to direct members' attention to the urgent update. And I would also take declarations of lobbying at this point, if anyone's been lobbied. Councillor Mumford's been lobbied. I've been lobbied. Anyone else? Surprisingly enough. Okay, right, that's just me, Councillor Stockwell and Councillor Mumford then. Oh, we're lucky. Right, okay. Councillor Mumford. Councillor Prendergast, you indicated next.
Thank you. I've just got a few questions, although I am sort of still reeling, Mr. Ryan, from white UPC windows, and also I'm sure you mentioned that the development would have white UPVC windows, and also the fact that there are 15 conditions attached to this, which seems rather a lot. But just coming back to the principles of development or the matters for consideration, it says in the report at paragraph at point 6.0 about impacts to the heritage and conservation area, and I cannot find any comment from our conservation officer on this. And I've also looked at the appeal decision, and I can't see how we have worked with this application around the appeal, because the appeals inspector was very, very clear that any development or introduction of domestic paraphernalia to this site would cause harm to the setting of the conservation area and the historic environment. So I'm a little bit at a loss here about, you know, I mean, where is the comment from the conservation officer is what I'm saying.
Top of page 24.
Thank you. I had missed that. Okay, so that's answered that one. Councillor Stockwell has already pointed out that Sutton Valence is not a rural service centre, and that's a basic thing that I would expect all of us in this room and all our planning officers to know, and, you know, for it to be correct in a report of this sort. Also, I just want to know, as a matter of interest, we do have another agenda item at the end, which has an appeal that was dismissed at Hillside House, Sutton Valence Hill. I don't know if you know, I haven't had time to look it up, if you happen to know what the reasons for dismissing that appeal were, because it would be quite interesting. Okay, I shall look whilst other members are speaking.
Councillor Harwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, for anybody who knows this site, it's not a rural Lidl site, it is quite utilitarian in terms of the type of stabling that's on the site and the school and so on that's there. There is another issue here in relation to the fact that we're just at the interface between the Greensand and the Wealdon clay, and so therefore there's issues there about line water and surface water. So I think potentially there is an opportunity in this application if we get this right in terms of the point that's been raised around materials. If we get the materials pinned down, if we do get with I think the black weatherboarding and so on is appropriate in this setting. I think actually we've got a lower density of building under this proposal. And where the open space is, we could have a wet suds feature in there, and that would tackle the surface water runoff issue in South Street. And so there is a potential to actually bring some benefits if this is done properly. So I am not instinctively against it. I've also read the inspector's decision, and what is clear, very clear from the inspector's decision is that decision was made on the old local plan, and it was all old local plan policies which are cited. None of them exist anymore. We don't have an anti-coalescence policy anymore. We don't have EMB 28 anymore. We just do not have that same level of protection because of guidance from government has changed, and there is a more permissive landscape in terms of development. And I think actually this is the kind of site where redevelopment can work. So I don't think anything has actually been seconded, so I will actually move that we do grant permission as per the papers, but I think that would need to be with the surety that we have a materials palette brought back and a detailed landscaping scheme brought back which incorporates a wet suds feature on the proposed open space. And I think there's an opportunity to bring back the orchard and so on that was lost 30 or so years ago from this site and grubbed up within the landscaping scheme. So I don't think this is necessarily all bad, and the point that was raised by the chairman and officers around that there will certainly be less traffic generation, I think, from this change of use. So I think it's very difficult to find a ground for refusal. Thank you.
There is a couple of technical problems in that sense. First of all, just a minor one, as it wouldn't be as per the papers, as you're proposing a couple of amendments.
With those changes and the rest of it.
Secondly, the slight problem I think we need to get our head around is that the landscaping scheme is a reserved matter. So there is a bit of a problem there. I'm not saying we can't overcome it, but I think we need to give some thought, because the landscaping scheme, which is just as well, frankly, because the submitted landscaping scheme is the weakest point of this application by quite some considerable. But that is an indicative scheme, fortunately. But I think we do need to consider that, and I'll ask the officer how we deal with that, because that does raise some procedural questions. Tony or Mr. Timms or both?
Normally when you have an outline permission, for instance, scale may be reserved, and you put conditions on which say, for instance, that the buildings won't be more than 2-storey high. You could put a condition on which says that certain things need to come back as part of the reserved matters in terms of landscaping. So you can actually apply the same principle to the landscaping reserved matters in this case.
Just wanted to check that, so because we have got caught out about this issue before, Mr. Timms. Can you?
So the only thing I, in listening, wasn't sure what the SUD scheme is for. If it either needs to be for the 3 bungalows, or is it just a sort of wet feature in the landscaping? Because it can't really be something to address a problem beyond the site.
Yeah, if I may come back, Chairman. We have at condition 8 they've got to bring forward, the applicant has got to bring forward plans of a SUD scheme. As can be seen actually from the photograph and how damp that parking area is, the water comes down the Greensand Ridge into the site. So therefore, we can effectively intercept that flow by the creation of a SUDS feature within the open space on the northern edge of the site. So it will be both an ecologically appropriate feature in that area, and it will also prevent the runoff issue within the site. Thank you.
Do you need any further clarification, Mr Timms? I think that's fairly straightforward. Just check it.
I think that's fine, that it just relates to the development itself.
But clearly it would have a landscape impact as well. Moving on to Councillor Mumford. And then I'll...
It always amazes me that we start talking the detail of the ecological biodiversity before we've decided on the actual principle of developing. However, very, very annoyed that the officers presented Rural Service Centre in the papers and repeated it tonight, and that there's any reference of development, because we all know, or us that spent 6 years doing it, that we put a build boundary around Sutton Valence as a larger village, and that's where the development goes. So this is Windfall, and it's in the open countryside. My concerns with this application is firstly the rural economy. And if we've got sites all over our countryside that are making money, and we should be protecting the rural economy, and we should not be encouraging people to get businesses that have got a little bit of land, pack them up into a more profitable instant cash. So jobs and the rural economy I am concerned about, of the actual principle of allowing this. And somewhere in that local plan we actually state that we will protect within our parishes the businesses that run. Now, the speaker was quite correct. The anti-coalescence is the other problem I've got. Where do we stop? We've got the harbour to the south, and we've got the village to the north. And a characteristic of the villages in this parish, in this borough, are that within the parishes we've got hamlets. And one thing that we've always protected was the joining of the hamlets through anti-coalescent policies, which we don't have anymore. Maybe we will after the review, and maybe it's something we should be looking at. But this is in the open countryside. It is filling in the open countryside between the hamlet, the harbour, if I can call it a hamlet, and the village itself. Open countryside, it's removing it, and therefore, in my mind, that is damaging the open countryside. So we could be looking at SP17 as some form of replacement to an anti-coalescence policy. So SP17, if Councillor Stockwell would like to look in that direction, might be a way she looks. And the other thing that I still have a tremendous problem with is businesses in the countryside not... there's a viability question, but I want that viability proved to me beyond a doubt that the only way that we can use this land is, in doing away with jobs and the rural economy, is to build houses on it and sterilise it. I'm not convinced. So they're my problems. They're more general problems. They're policy problems. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, because I'm glad, though I don't necessarily agree, that Councillor Mumford has sort of taken this back to a sort of a holistic, a policy look at the site, because this is very much about the principle. And yes, what Councillor Harwood says about the landscaping is important and will come later on in the process, but ultimately we're judging an outline application here. And the thing that keeps coming back in my mind, there's two things really. Obviously, the first has been mentioned before about the appeal decision and the fact that obviously the local plan and the status of the local plan has changed substantially since then, and the reference to ENB 28 and ENB 32 is no more. So for the villagers and the residents of Sutton Valence who are concerned about this application, well, this is one, I think, that falls foul of the change in policy that's happened in the last couple of years, as far as I can see, and what we're judging these applications against has changed. And the second thing is that this is a brownfield site. It's clearly it's not a greenfield site, and I think we've got an obligation to use these sites effectively. And the proposal that has come forward in terms of the number of dwellings, the scale of it, the height of the buildings, and so on and so forth, I think is pretty good actually. I know it's much better than the proposals that have come before, and I think can enhance the area. So that's why I'm happy to support Councillor Harwood on this. And ultimately, this sort of site, I think, will be developed at some point, and we have an opportunity here to shape the developments that we want. And I'm happy with the proposal, the principle of the proposal that has come forward.
Thank you. That's quite clear. Well, members, we haven't had Councillor Stockwell. You earlier on attempted to move a ground for refusal, which I said I'd come back to you on those grounds, and also to see, and once you've outlined potential grounds, to see whether that's seconded.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, nothing's changed my mind. I think we're just funneling more housing into Sutton Valence where there are no shops, no facilities. I think that the doctor's surgery isn't too far away, but that's about it. And they've got to cross busy roads to get to a bus, to go anywhere. You know, and we're funneling more and more in on every bit of greenfield part that's left at the bottom of Sutton Valence. This was only allowed because it was livestock, horses. You know, it was a horse liveries and all the rest of it, and that was fine. If it had been housing at that time, it would never have been allowed, and I really can't support funneling more housing in here. Every little bit of grass land going up the hill towards Sutton Valence will be further filled in on the precedent of us allowing this. So I haven't changed my mind. I think I will still keep to a refusal. Do you want ENV 28, okay, ENV 32?
At the risk of attempting to right, members, right, I think, okay, let's try and be a little bit more focused, shall we? The nub of the previous appeal decision was that there was an impact on the landscape and the conservation area. Now, the question members have to ask themselves is whether the changes to the planning application in terms of the lesser number of buildings and the lesser height has overcome that issue. Regardless of the changes in policy, the landscape protection policies and the countryside protection policies could still apply, do still apply generally, if there is harm either to ecological diversity. Unfortunately, looking at that site, that's a pretty hard argument to make, or a landscape. Now, if members are going to bring forward a ground of refusal, then then those members need to argue that there remains harm to the landscape despite the changes to the form of the built development. I'm struggling with that one because it is going to be a pretty hard argument to substantiate. However, that's my personal opinion. If members still think that there is demonstrable harm to the landscape and they can evidence where that harm can be seen from, then you could still advance that argument. But you need to say what the harm is and go from there. I will leave you to think about that for a couple of minutes and see if anyone else wants to speak on the application. And there isn't a highways argument because clearly there is going to be less traffic. That it's a brownfield site, and even under EMV 28, brownfield sites have come forward. It is one of the stupid arguments of planning policy that equestrian use is not an agricultural use, but is considered to be brownfield use. Right. Councillor Mumford, if you wish to advance a rural that argument, we will discuss that further. But I would say that anti-coalescence and highways grounds won't work. It clearly isn't clearly isn't a biodiversity argument. So it comes down to whether there's any landscape harm. And Councillor Mumford, would you like to? Well, let's see what the officer thinks of the rural economy argument, shall we?
We don't have a policy which seeks to actually protect rural businesses. I think in terms of apologies for the error in terms of the rural service centre. It is a larger village, but in terms of context, that point was made in terms of sustainability and policy DM5, and included in the urgent updates is the text of DM5, and the relevant point is 2, which talks about significant environmental improvement to the site, and also about access to rural service centres or larger villages. So I think it's DM5 that actually applies here, and that is the officer's justification for recommending this for approval.
Yeah, it's not agricultural, but it is part of the rural economy. It makes money in the countryside. I keep hearing this quote on large village. If the officer wants to continue talking about larger village, he will find underneath the larger village of Sutton Valence on SP somewhere around 15, one of the last paragraphs says we will preserve the rural infrastructure, the shops, etc. It actually says that. So if you want to continue to talk about this being a larger village, then look at that policy, which actually states we will defend it. But we need to look at this at review. I'm going to go back to where Sutton Valence was speaking. Can the officers give us an assurance that the gardens, we can write something in the conditions that the gardens will stay in perpetuity as gardens? I don't think there's a lot of scope giving them 106 on their play area with 3 bungalows. I don't think there's any scope for that. Just can we ensure that the gardens stay as gardens?
I think what, we have condition 10, which seeks a management plan for the garden. The applicant would need to submit details to the council for approval, and that would need to be that would need to run in terms of the lifetime of the actual planning permission. If there's no way of actually preventing someone in the future putting in a plan application to build on that land, but I think in terms of this application, they would need to submit that management plan to us, and that would actually preserve that land as garden space.
Councillor Harwood, did you have a point on that?
I did, and this isn't in jest, but if we put a wet pond in the middle of that site and we put some nice planting around it, some new woodland or orchard around it, by the next May it will be rammed with great crested newts and nobody's going to develop that site.
That is a very fair point and certainly worthy of note. Right, I've waited and given members a chance, but if we were going to proceed with grounds for refusal, we do need to know what the landscape harm, if any, is, and I'm struggling with that.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I do still feel that this is going to erode the openness of the countryside there and do damage to the countryside. It's also going to consolidate, between the Green Sandwich Special Landscape Area, if it was or is still, and the lower part of the village. I can't see that that is overcome by putting, or improved by putting in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 houses. I'm still of the view that we should be refusing this on the grounds that it's, and it's been dismissed at appeal 3 times. This has been to appeal, this whole piece of land. And it always comes up with keeping that coalescent strip between the bottom and the top. So I should be voting against any...
Right, we'll take... Is that secondly? Oh, sorry, Councillor Mortimer, you're speaking there.
Yes, I'm sorry. I do applaud Councillor Stock for really trying hard on this, because, being a rural councillor, I do understand where she's coming from. But it's very clear from DM5, DM12, it meets our local plan that we've only just agreed to. So with all the bits that Tony's talking about, we've got to make sure we get it right. I do know, I find it rather strange when we say this is an outline application, but it's only the landscaping that's going to come back to us. So have we got on there, because I'm sorry, you're going to tell me, is it a total of 5.5 metres high? Is that going to be conditioned to the drawings they've put in? Are they the sort of things that Councillor Harwood are talking about? Because if so, we just got to approve it and get on.
I think it would be wise to amend the recommendation to actually include a height restriction, because what we don't want to do is approve 3 dwellings in outline and found out that we've actually got two-storey or 3-storey houses. That would be unacceptable. Mr. Ryan?
Yes, the application is an outline, but landscaping is the only reserved matters. So we have the applicant has put in plans showing the height of the buildings, and it's those buildings that are being approved. And we have a plans condition as well, which will ensure that they actually build what's actually being approved. So you don't need a condition which restricts the height, because members are actually approving the height of the building as part of this application.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Morton.
And just coming back, if we do approve it, can we have permitted development rights taken away, or do they not have any? And that might again be in the report, but could we have that, please, so everything comes back to us?
15. Just take away PD rights. Yeah.
Okay, that's very sensible, I think. Councillor Prendergast.
I'll be really quick here, and I'm trying to help Councillor Stockwell out a little bit, but I do want to take advice from officers. I actually personally don't feel that the harm to the historical environment has been overcome with this application. So if officers could look at that for me. The fact that, yes, you're saying it's brownfield, but it's still open countryside, so I do feel that we do need to take our countryside policies into place. And I very much support what Councillor Mumford has raised, that our policies relating to larger villages says quite clearly that we must support the local economy. So are there any grounds there? Because this is a rural business. If you could answer those, and if you think that there is a case there that would be robust enough, then I am happy to second Councillor Stockwell.
Right. Mr. Timms or Mr. Ryan? 3 very pointed questions, which is the nub of the issue, frankly.
I'll cover the larger village point. The policy SP15 relates to Sutton Valence larger village, and it relates to, as on the proposals map, the definition of that, which doesn't include the site. The site's in the countryside, as is outlined in the report. So where it says in that policy, the loss of local shops, community facilities, green spaces will be resisted, that's within the larger village, which is the main village up on the Greensand Ridge. There is a separate strategic policy on economic development, and that doesn't protect economic uses outside of the settlement boundaries. So I know that there's an overarching desire in the MPPF to protect economic development, but in our local plan it's not specified to outside those settlement boundaries. And the reason, as I think as Mr Ryan said, there's reference to a larger village is DM5, where it says if they're in a location that's sustainable and well related to a larger village or a rural service centre. So that's why we've picked on the larger village, albeit that it's incorrectly referred to as a rural service centre.
Just to take that point, just to clarify, what weight, if any, despite the fact that it's not specifically referred to in our policy, could be placed on the MPPF's general presumption in support of economic issues? I'm just asking a question.
Well, the local plan which has been recently adopted is the development plan. That's the statutory basis on which the decisions should be made. The MPPF's a material consideration, but the development plan, the local plan, is paramount.
Seems to answer. Right, I will, as this is the amendment, I will take a vote on this. I think he did actually answer them, but if you wish to say anything. I think from the if you direct you to page 24, top of that, hang on. I think the point is set out in 6.20 to 6.22, where the Conservation Officer states that essentially, in his view, the changes in the scheme overcome the objection, in his view. And the Council's Conservation Officer does not raise any overriding planning objection to the proposal on heritage grounds for members who haven't seen. I think that's fairly right. That may be right or wrong, but that's a clearly expressed view. Given that, I think it does come down, I think, at the end of the day, to a clear yes or no on whether there is still a landscape effect. Members just have to make their mind up on that. As this is the amendment at this stage, and not the substantive, I am going to take a vote at this point on those in favour of the amendment to refuse. And we'll come back to that. It is seconded, isn't it? I thought Councillor Mumford... Oh, no, Councillor Prendergast, apologies. Councillor Prendergast, I am sorry about that. Councillor Prendergast did second it, so therefore it is a valid amendment. Correct me if I get this wrong, councillors, but what I understood members to be saying was that notwithstanding the changes to the application, but there still is harm to the open character of the countryside in this location. That's what I understand you to be saying. And I think, I don't know whether you, I don't think there's any merit in pursuing a heritage argument, but I must ask you whether you wish to pursue, it's going to be very difficult, but whether you wish to pursue any issue regarding the economic issue. Personally, I think it's down to the landscape. I mean, it's a yes or no, whether you think there's some remaining harm to the landscape. So it's just that ground then. I'll put that amendment to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? That falls. We move to the substantive motion proposed by Councillor Harwood and seconded by Councillor Borton. I just need to get this right because clearly this is an important site and we need to make sure that we deal with it as far as we can. Now, Councillor Harwood and Councillor Borton, if you could refresh our memories.
Thank you, Chairman. Essentially, it is, as per the papers and the urgent update, other than the landscaping for the landscaping scheme for the site, and that will change condition 14, where it talks about the drawing number for the proposed soft landscaping. We'll need to come back to this committee to be agreed, and within that, the semi-natural open space come conservation garden or whatever it's called, that should incorporate a wet suds feature, and it should also incorporate a kind of natural kind of orchard woodland planting within the site. And the other issue is, because there are concerns around materials, that the materials palette also comes back for approval at committee, so we can ensure that the window frames and so on are appropriate for this edge of village setting. Thank you.
Councillor Borton, do you concur? Okay. I think we've discussed. Yes, I think the height is covered by the condition which requires adherence to the submitted plans. Okay, that's clear. Sorry, one moment.
That's fine. It was just an information point that the materials and the landscaping would be two separate types of application. They may not come back at the same time, just so members are aware of it.
As long as we get it right and don't have that terrible UVPC material all over the place, which just looks tacky. Right, members, those in favour of the substantive motion? Those against? Abstentions? That motion as amended, that motion amending the recommendation is carried by 10 votes, 8 votes to 2 to 2. Thank you for the correction. Right, we move on to the next application, which is Yew Tree Close, Lordswood, item 15, page 32. Before we go any further, I must transmit the apologies of Councillor Wendy Hinder, who had intended to come to speak to this application tonight. But unfortunately, she's been overtaken by a clash of diary dates and has had to be elsewhere with a long-standing commitment. It's not because she doesn't want to be here. Is Councillor Spooner around? Because if he doesn't come back soon, he will be ineligible to take part in this discussion, which is why I'm sort of delaying slightly. I'll wait for Councillor Spooner to take his seat. Right. Item 15, page 32, Yew Tree Close, Lordswood.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a change of use of amenity land to garden land. Just show you on the block plan. The site is just here, and the change of use would relate to number 1, Yew Tree Close, which is to the north, so it would become part of their garden. And there's Gleamingwood Drive just to the east. It's easy probably just to run through the photos. So this is the area of land within here, just on the right-hand side of the trees. It would come from just behind this tree to the wall here, not in line with the wall you can see in the foreground there. This is the application property, and the new line for the garden would come approximately where that pillar is, just inside the tree line there, and just come straight down. So the land on the left would become garden land. This is looking the other way, so you can see the edge of the brick wall there, and it would come back towards us again, just inside the trees. That's a view from the road, so the land is behind the trees that we can see there. And that's just further down the road, providing some context where there are garage buildings which are up against the road, which wouldn't be the case here. As the report outlines, the enclosure of this space will line up with the gardens to the south, and in effect it would square this space off so officers don't consider that it would look out of place. There'd be an existing buffer retained, which includes these trees, and that would be between the new boundary and the path. And obviously you can see there's also a buffer here to the actual road itself. So for this reason, it's not considered to cause any harm to the street scene. In terms of privacy to the existing properties, you can just see behind. They would obviously retain their existing walls, so people wouldn't be able to see from the garden into the existing. And just lastly, in order to protect those trees, condition 4, which basically requires tree protection fencing, we just need to amend that condition to require construction details of any boundary treatments to ensure there's no damage to the trees or their roots. And on this basis, permission is recommended as outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Timms. Councillor Hinder, Boxley Parish Council, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to start actually with changing what I've got down here because I object strongly to what the officer has just said. He stated to you that the boundary on this Gleemanwood Drive side of that wall would not change the street scene. The street scene is what we're objecting to. When the developers built this estate, they included 2 features. Gleemanwood Drive is the main access road to the site. And Gleemanwood Drive has build-outs down the road, and in between is parking. What they then did and put in was the boundary wall that runs down Gleemanwood Drive is a feature that reflects the actual road. And so it is not a straight, flat boundary. It has indentations in it to create a beautiful, lovely street scene that the residents up there enjoy. If you permit this application, you will be removing one of those indentations that the developer deliberately put in, and the next thing is that you're going to get that as a snowball effect all the way up that road. So, contrary to what the officer stated to you, it is not just creating a street. It is a situation that was deliberately done by the developer to create this scene. We were only drawn attention to this when the trees were cut down and neighbours, residents approached the parish council saying, why are the trees being cut down? From that, we discovered it was actually NBC who cut the trees down for reasons known best to them. No other trees in that road, and it's a long one, have been cut down. And we are curious and wonder whether NBC did it because they'd had pre-application talks with this person. That piece of land is not desolate. On the parish council, we created a scheme of work throughout the parish using the community support people. They approached us and we lined up various tasks for them to do. And this is part of one of their tasks, to maintain and keep that area looking nice. Now there's an application in to take it away. We strongly object.
Thank you, Councillor Hinder. I don't think there's a Boxley ward member here, so I'll go to Councillor Harwood, who indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, to put it into context, this entire site was carved out of ancient woodland, and actually these little fringe areas with the few trees on are the ghost of the woodland edge, essentially. So, you know, probably if you're looking at policy, you've still got ancient woodland soils under there, and come the spring, it's it is desolate because it's winter, but you still have bluebells, you still have wood anemones coming up in the brambles and amongst the leaves that you'll see there around these few trees that are left. And also the point that was very well made by the parish council is also true, in that we cannot look at this inset in the wall in isolation. It's a feature along Gleaming Wood Drive that was done to give a slightly clumsy perhaps, but an attempt to give a kind of woodland edge approach to show that you are in a rural area, and on the other side of the road you still have got the woods on the slopes. So I actually think that we would urbanise a significant thoroughfare by having a build out and by essentially removing the feature that was built in. So I'd like to actually move that we refuse permission because of a negative impact upon the street scene, in that this is a sylvan landscape approach where I frankly do not believe, we've already had the trees cut down, I do not believe that the roots and the trees and the woodland soil will survive 5 minutes through it being turned into a kind of urban garden space, because we don't know what we can have sheds and things on it, and it will totally undermine the area. So I think also there is a fundamental just principle issue here about taking public land into private garden when it serves a specific purpose. And I suggest there's not been any ecological survey or anything attached to this, which may be significant if there are, because of Bluebell's issue, because they actually do have some protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981.
We'll come back and firm that up in a minute or two, but I'll go to Councillor Prendergast because I think she indicated.
Yes, I did second Councillor Harwood. And really, my grounds, I agree with him completely that it would undermine, well, and also Boxley Parish Council, that it would undermine the existing street scene. And I do feel that the loss of public space there, the public land, is a consideration. That's all.
The second point is possibly not a planning ground, although it's an interesting question whether the council has to actually agree to dispose of it. But that's another issue. But that's for another committee, perhaps. But we need to, first of all, can I take any declarations of lobbying that's been made on this application before I forget? I don't think there's been any, but I better ask. There isn't an urgent update. Councillor Harwood, would you like to try and condense what you said, because there's quite a lot there into something a little
Okay,
briefer.
I mean, essentially the problem that we've got here is there will be a negative impact upon the street scene both from urbanising this area of semi-natural land and by diminishing a landscape feature, which is the insets along Gleaming Wood Drive opposite ancient Cowbet Wood, which were deliberately done to almost mirror the woodland edge on the other side of the road. I mean, it was, it's a deliberate conceit as a landscaping and screening for the development. And
I think we need to get the fact it was planned that way into that.
Yeah, that it's a planned piece of landscape to soften the urban edge. And I think that needs to be conveyed somehow in terms of the wording. Thank you.
And there's the point about whether there should have been an ecological study. I know it's a very small piece of land, but if it is ancient woodland soil, which it probably is.
Well, it is ancient woodland soil, yeah.
Well, I'm not saying that we put a reference to ancient woodland in. I'm just saying that there probably should have been some form of ecological survey. Councillor Mumford.
I'd like to second that. I'll be third in it. I won't second it, but all I would say is I imagine probably when I was at school someone looked at that feature and said, what a wonderful feature there is to this new development. And they sold it on that, and now we're being asked to fill it in. And no, it came along with that development. It's part of the feature of that development. So I will be supporting the motion.
Mr Timms, and then Mr Cox.
Yeah, all I was going to, on the, obviously from an officer's point of view, appreciate that may have been part of the design at that time. We're obviously looking at it now and have come to our conclusion. However, just on the reason for refusal, I think maybe you need to, because the policy that you'd quote would be DM1, and then maybe just into the reason you need to talk about Part 2 says that development should respond positively to the local natural character of the area. So maybe just getting something about that into the reason. That I don't think it can. I know you want to refer to why it was there in the past, but I think you've got to get into why it doesn't fit in with what we see on the ground now.
And that is a very sensible comment, and thank you for that, Mr Timms. Councillor Harwood, I'm sure you can incorporate...
I mean, policy DM1, I mean, it absolutely conveys what the issue is here. And essentially, this is a little sylvan bay within the landscape, and it serves that purpose now. I mean, look at it now, and this area, and then compare it to the other picture you saw, which has got the brick wall hard on the road. I mean, you can see this is a much more attractive feature, and also it's a rhythm within the street scene as well, because it's one of a couple of those bays in that area which safeguarded the best trees along the woodland edge.
Right, Councillor Cox, and then we'll try and wrap up.
A very quick question. Did somebody mention that these trees that we see there now have been removed? Is that correct? No, so the bits behind it. So none of those ones that we're looking at now, they're all still there. That's okay, because I was going to ask us to replace them.
I think MVC will have to look at replacing the ones that are removed, but that's not actually on the application site itself. So we'll have to look at that outside this discussion. Right, if I can ask if the officers... Councillor Harwood, I'm sorry to press you on this, but if you could just give us the wording, incorporating DM1.
Right. The setback, which is subject to this application, is an attractive element of the street scene in Gleamingwood Drive, which reflects and mirrors a woodland edge, and its loss would diminish the quality of the street scene and the rhythm of open space of these bays, these open space setbacks on Gleamingwood Drive. So essentially,
thereby being contrary to policy DM1 of the local plan.
Yeah.
We can probably put a few commas and full stops in there, but that's basically what it is. Okay. Don't worry, we've got it, and I'll repeat it. You have got it? Yep, we've got it. Okay. Those in favour of that recommendation which has been proposed, and second, yes, that recommendation to refuse, yes. That's unanimous, therefore I don't have to take any further votes. Congratulations, Councillor Hinder. Have a nice evening. We now move on to item 16, page 38, which may take a moment or two. Okay. Okay, right, ladies and gentlemen, moving rapidly on. Court Lodge, Farmer Street, Teeson.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the construction of a 5-bedroom house on land between Ringwood and Ridgewood, and Court Lodge Farm. On the aerial photograph, it is the land. You can see the swimming pool, which is in the neighbour's garden, and it's the land just to the right of that neighbouring property. Court Lodge Farm is a Grade 2 listed building. The application is located in Teeston Conservation Area, with the boundary of the area also the western boundary of the application site, which is a footpath going from the access road northwards. To the northeast of the site is the Grade 2 listed St Peter and St Paul Church. The local pattern of development is mixed, with buildings of various different scales, appearances, age and design. In terms of the site location, the plan to the left shows the location of the new building, set back from the access road, with off-street parking at the front. The private access road runs along the bottom of the image, and Tunbridge Road is beyond, further to the south. Church Street runs parallel to the north of the site. The Grade 2 listed building to the east, which is visible on the smaller plan, is 20 metres to the left of the proposed new building, with the modern building called Ridgewood to the west. These are the elevations of the new building. Although of a modern appearance, there are references to design elements on neighbouring properties, such as the two-storey gable, the pitched roof. The applicant stated that the building will be constructed in brick, and a planning condition is recommended to seek further details of the brick and other facing materials. In terms of the photographs, this is looking towards the side of the Grade 2 listed building, with the application site on the left, and St Peter and St Paul's Church visible at the rear of the site. This photograph is looking west along the front boundary, with the lime tree in the corner of the site. The adjacent building called Ridgewood is visible in the background. This is taken from the south of the site, with the listed building visible again. Note the building on the opposite side of the road, and the sort of closeness to the listed building. The application site is over to the left again on this photo. This view is looking east along the access road. You can just see the spire of the church in the background, and Ridgewood is the middle of the modern buildings shown there. The large tree in the background again is on the corner of the application site. This is the entrance to the footpath, which marks the western boundary. So the modern building is, you can just about see that on the left, with the application site on the right. This is looking north across the site, with Ridgewood again visible on the left. And looking towards the site again, with the lime tree visible, Ridgewood in the background. The proposed dwelling is considered acceptable in terms of its design and appearance, and is considered in keeping with the visual appearance of the area. It is considered that the proposed building will not cause any undue harm to the character and appearance of Teeston Conservation Area or the nearby listed buildings and their setting. The proposal will not result in any harm in relation to highway or road safety, and the officer recommendation is to approve subject to planning conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. First of all, Mr. Kelly, an objector, please.
Are we live? Teeston calling. Mr. Chairman, members, thank you very much for allowing me to speak on behalf of all the residents of Court Lodge Farm. We own the common private road and the field to the south of this site. I'd like to really start by picking up what, as lay people, we see as quite a number of inaccuracies and inconsistencies in this application, which we genuinely feel haven't been challenged. The report from DHA just seems to have been accepted in many respects. And to focus in on this, hopefully you've seen the paper submission that we've put in. But the key points here that I'd like to talk about are, firstly, the inaccuracies. Now, the application makes mention that access to the site is from the street. Now, there has been a subsequent amendment to that statement, which is now correct. The access is from the private road, which is owned by us, the residents. There is no permission to park on that road, so lorries, and I accept that access to the site isn't a major requirement of the planning process. There are ramifications here, so lorries would not be able to park within this area. They'd have to park on the street, already an incredibly dangerous junction, if you know it, where the A26 meets the street, meets Thiessen House, meets the Chinese restaurant's car park, meets our private track. We've had accidents and bumps there in the past. So lorries would have to park there, which would be incredibly dangerous. Furthermore, we feel there'd be more traffic if this went ahead, maybe 3 more cars from a detached property. Already the applicant is using the Grade 2 listed farmhouse as a bed and breakfast commercial entity, and we probably see 6 or 8 more cars passing through the track or the private drive onto this very dangerous junction, and the dangers there will just be exacerbated by this. The final point on access is that the retaining wall for the garden, small, low ragstone wall, which has been part of the curtilage for a number of years, would have to be disturbed. So there are inaccuracies. The other point that was raised that is wrong is there is no recent planning history to this site. Well, the members will know that there is. And very briefly, when we first moved into Court Lodge Farm, we asked for a 5-bar gate to be erected, and understandably that was declined. We took it on the chin. It was no further away than this proposed house would be from the Grade 2 listed property. So we're now very perplexed as lay people as to how permission or support can be given to a house being built here. But more fundamentally than that, in the last month, we've seen on the website that 2 applications have been refused, again, understandably. This hasn't been referenced in the decision on this particular application. The first being in Livesey Street, 8th of January, which was for 2 small properties. This is deemed as, this is from your own site, this is deemed as an unacceptable level of harm to the character of Thiessen Conservation Area, the setting of the nearby Grade 2 listed properties and surrounding countryside.
Could you bring your remarks to a close, please?
Sorry.
Could you wind up, please?
Okay. And very quickly, sorry, the clock wasn't running. The granary, which is one of our neighbours' property, they had a single-storey extension declined last month. Again, this was seen as harm to the area and unjustifiable. So, to wrap up, Mr. Chairman, apologies for overrunning. We see massive inconsistency here on a site of fantastic historic interest to everybody, and we are very, very perplexed.
Thank you very much. I let you go on slightly because, as you say, the clock wasn't running, so you found it hard to time it. Right, we move on to Councillor Corlin of Thiessen Parish Council.
Good evening. Your committee papers do not refer to our objections to this application. Yesterday, we sent an email with pictures giving visual context to our objections, together with our submission, and you have today received an urgent update which belatedly refers to our objections, which was not given as a reason for referral. This site is not from the side garden as stated in the report, and nor is it on the western flank. It is part of the front garden of the Grade 2 farmhouse, which will be left with a front garden out of scale with its proportions. It already has no side garden and only a courtyard at the rear. As the site falls within Thiessen's local plan designation as open countryside, the report should not have referred to policy DM11, but it does. And the report's declaration that the proposals meets the MPPF's less than substantial harm cannot be justified, as this application represents some of the worst aspects of infill, such as overbuild and severe adverse impact on the property shorn of much of its garden. The 5-bedroom house will be shoehorned into the small triangular site that you've seen, with minimal side access between front and back. It would block views to and from the Grade 2 church and views from the village green across the Medway Valley. Design and mass will be out of keeping with neighbours, and its rather plain design would just not sit well with the rest of Courtlarge Farm, nor with the converted barn and 2 homes that are between the site and access to the public highway. It would be overbearing and detract from the conservation area. Redevelopment of Courtlarge Farm was approved in 1999. It was then noted that the design consisted of tight groups of farm buildings rather than separate detached houses, which was of particular concern to English heritage. Evidently, such heritage consultation has not taken place for this application. However, the Conservation Officer felt it necessary to state the new house can be screened off from its neighbours with hedging, etc. And certainly the substantial loss of trees should mitigate against the development. He also requires very substantial changes to proposed materials. This is clearly not a compelling application. Your predecessors on Planning Committee made a site visit in 1999 and concluded that after redevelopment there should be no further development on the site. That cannot, of course, fetter your discretion at this meeting. We believe this application is incompatible with several local plan policies, and we ask you please to refuse this application as the proposal is completely unsuited to this part of our village. But if you are in doubt, we ask for a repeat site visit so that you might see the context for yourselves. Thank you very much.
Councillor Mrs Gooch, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I'm here to reinforce my brief views on this application, and to strongly support the views of Teessing Parish Council. I also wish to bring to members' attention technical omissions and inaccuracies with this application, which render its submission at best premature. First, the site is not developable. Contrary to the Officer Urgent Update, planning permission for the Court Lodge Farm development that we see today was granted 18 years ago under MA/99/0037S for South, subject to a Section 106 agreement, a legal agreement between the developer and the Borough Council under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, as amended or replaced from time to time. And this was to prevent any part of the remaining area being developed. This imposition was to restrict development in a sensitive area, to retain the farmhouse feel of the site and to preserve the green space within the conservation area and within the site of listed buildings. Hence, the developer or his successors need to apply to the Borough Council for that obligation to be rescinded before any part of the site can be developed. No such application has been made. Second, to do with the access, Section 6 of the application form clearly indicates new access onto the highway. This is not so. The design and access statement describes the access as a new entrance onto the street. Again, not so. The access would actually be onto the private drive which leads onto the street. This drive is in the private ownership of the Court Lodge Farm Management Company. They have not been correctly informed as required by the regulations. Thirdly, the views of Teessing Parish Council were submitted well within the consultation time period and published on the planning portal, but have not been mentioned in the published officer report. It therefore follows that the Parish Council's views have not been seen to be properly considered or properly taken into account at the right time or in the right way. In other words, it should have been in the officer's report. Therefore, I urge members to defer this application to enable these technicalities and omissions to be properly sorted out and to enable fair, transparent consideration of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gooch. Very interesting. Before we proceed any further, can I take any declarations of lobbying? And Councillor Harwood as well. So that's everyone except Councillor Hastie and Councillor Mortimer and Councillor Stockwell for some reason. Well, okay, so that's everyone else. Someone's obviously working from an old list of committee members. Right. I'll also draw members' attention to the fact there is an urgent update on the papers. Right. Before we proceed any further, I think can I just ask about this interesting Section 106 agreement?
I'm not aware of the actual details, but as the applicant has actually put in a planning application, we're duty bound to actually consider the application in front of us. If there is an obligation, a separate obligation, then if planning permission is granted, then they would need to actually apply to have that clause removed.
That's what I thought, but it's nice to hear that. Right. I've only seen Councillor Mortimer and Councillor Prendergast so far. Councillor Mortimer, you were first.
I just want to start off on the legal side here. I mean, you've heard about the access now. We've been told it's been changed to go onto a private road. Now, I would like to ask the officers, like I did a few weeks ago on another application, if that is the case and it goes onto private land, that means they need, I'm sure, to issue a certificate B to the owners of that land so they can use the land to get to it. Has that been addressed? Have a certificate been passed over? And if it's not, if it hasn't been, and it should have been, then it's quite clear this application should be deferred until such notification is sent to the owners of that land.
That may take a minute or two to look up, so I'll take Councillor Prendergast now.
Thank you. I'm a little surprised that this application is here in front of us. I really would have thought that this would have been a delegated decision to say no, because what we have here is a garden development within the curtilage of a designated heritage asset, which itself sits within a conservation area. It's 45 metres from a Grade 2 listed church. It's I'm shocked when I'm reading comments like from the conservation officer that says this new development would make a positive contribution. How would it make a positive contribution? Because it doesn't say. And to me, it just seems like it's an absolutely inappropriate infill development within a conservation area and going against, the value of our heritage assets. So I know Councillor Mortimer has suggested a deferment, but I am going for a straight refusal, please, on those grounds, and I hope I have somebody to support me on that. Thank you.
Come back to that in a minute. Have they served the certificate?
They have served certificate B, but that's not on the owners of the land, the owners of the access road. No, which is what I think in terms of the application. It should have, the red line should have gone to the public highway, and anyone with interest in that land should have been served notice on. Yes,
and they have not been. No. In that case, I don't think we can determine it.
No, I think, Chairman, we need to defer that until that's happened. I'm sorry.
I take your point, Councillor Prendergast, but rules are rules. It can't be determined this evening. They have to serve that certificate. And so we have to... it's not valid to... Can I just... Okay, what we have here at this point is a motion to defer which has been proposed and seconded. We'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Harwood, if you're speaking against the deferral. But as far as I'm aware, we have not any great procedural choice but to defer it and invite them to amend their red line boundary, because that's what the rules say we should do. Councillor Harwood.
Just to add to that, Chairman, I remember the site visit to this site in 1999 vividly, and Councillor Mrs Stockwell was there as well. and there were some quite significant issues there, and I can remember the conservation officer being present and the strength of the concern about the impact upon the conservation area and the assets in that site was significant. So if this is deferred for a cycle or a couple of cycles or whatever, when it comes back, please can we have the conservation area to explain what has changed in the last 20 years?
I think that is a very fair comment, and I think that we really should, given the views that have been expressed, invite the conservation officer to attend that meeting. Councillor Mumford, briefly.
Yeah, I will keep it brief. 106, you're talking about a 106, you're generalising. I don't like doing things backwards. Could we have the details of that 106, what that said, and in context with when the application comes in next time?
That would seem admirably sensible. One moment. Okay, that's fine. We have a motion that's in 3 parts. But that is to amend the red line area, to have the conservation officer present, and to have the details of section 106 brought to this committee. All those in agreement? Yeah. That's everyone. Everyone, so I don't need to take any further votes. Moving rapidly on. If you turn to page 48 and page 49, appeal decisions. Well, I don't want to just note them because I do want to draw one item to members' attention. Well, possibly two, but certainly the second one, erection of a dwelling on land at West Street, Harwich, which was a committee overturn. It's a very interesting decision, as indeed possibly is the decision at Hillside House, Sutton Valence. In general, both the committee and the officers have come out of this very well. Congratulations to all concerned. Finally, as I said, we've got the chairman, vice chairman and political group spokespersons meeting on Monday evening. We do have an agenda already, but if there is anything burning away at the back of your minds, please do get in touch with your relevant group spokesperson, or yourself in this case, if you're independent or UKIP, and make sure that those items are brought up, because we only have these meetings every so often, and it is an opportunity to raise items for discussion. And at that point, I close the meeting and thank members and officers and members of the public for their involvement.